was chapter 4 in the last book. It's chapter 8 now. So today we're going to look at, as it says, prenatal and infant growth and some issues around now. And you might be asking yourselves, why are we looking at prenatal growth? But when you are a coach or a teacher or a trainer, what you see an individual do and behaviors that they are good at or poor at can be influenced during the prenatal period, right? So that growth and development during the prenatal period might change what you get to work with later on in that individual's life, okay? So what we have is a very strong genetic component to growth and development prenatally, but the baby is also sensitive to extrinsic factors. So we see a kind of interaction between the genetics that the baby has and these extrinsic factors that can influence how that growth occurs, right? We have a similar concept to what we were saying about with the skills, and we said that, you know, all humans, if they're typically developing, are going to get up and walk, but there's huge variability because of individual differences. We see the same idea in the actual growth curves and development of systems. Okay, so we have universality of growth and aging that hold true for any typically developing human, right, wherever they are on the planet. But we've also got these highly specific things that can occur that lead to individual variation. Okay? So the key concept for the beginning of the chapter here is that the growth that we see from conception through infancy is unsurpassed. The rate of growth that we see during that couple of years is faster than anything else we see during the rest of the life. Even though we have another growth spurt during our puberty, and it seems very rapid when we watch it, it's nothing like what goes on in the womb and during the first year and a half. Okay? So, as I said, early development is predominantly under the control of the genetic makeup of the baby. So 50% from mum, 50% from dad. And we hope that what we see is normal, typical development, right? So normal development gets determined and organized by this genetic material. But occasionally, we can see an abnormal, atypical development that is inherited when possibly a couple of things can happen. Either both parents may have a gene that is malformed, or they may, the genetic material can sometimes, when it joins together, an error can occur. Right? So we sometimes see these genetic developments that are not typical. Okay? And these external factors, extrinsic factors, often have very positive effects. So when we think about the baby being sensitive to extrinsic factors, that doesn't always have to be negative. That can be very positive. right? Because the mum's environment, right, that environment that the mum provides for the baby, extrinsic to the baby, it could still be intrinsic to mum, or it could be extrinsic to mum and find its way through to the baby, right? But if mum is very healthy and eats well and takes care of herself and gets plenty of sleep, then that's all extrinsic positive impact on the development of this teeny, teeny, tiny little thing, right? So negative effects can occur if mum catches a virus, right? Not all viruses can cross the placenta, but some of them can, okay? So then that virus could reach the baby, or substances that the mum is taking that maybe she shouldn't be taking may cross the placenta to the baby. And so we could have some negative impact as well. Okay, so initially, this cell, clump of cells, is called an embryo, and that phase lasts from conception to 2 months. Okay? Conception takes place within the fallopian tube, and then the new baby travels down, and by day 3 or 4, it's in the uterus and attached to the wall. Okay? So, the cells, initially a cell, differentiate, they split, right? So what we have is, by 3 days, when it's attaching in the uterus, we've gone from 1 cell to 32 cells, right? By day 4, we're at about 90 cells, right? So all that 32 cells, they're all dividing rapidly. So in just 24 hours, we go from 30 to 90, okay? So then the cells start to decide what kind of tissue they're going to be, driven by the genes, okay? So they may decide to move up to where the brain is going to develop and be nervous tissue. Or they may decide to move down to where the ankle is going to be and be a bone, right? That's all genetically driven. Okay? So, by about 4 weeks, we start to see limb buds where the arms and the legs are going to be. So we've got a little, by about 4 weeks, we've got this little kind of crescent moon shape with these bumps on the side and the bottom where the arms and the legs are going to develop. It's about 1 inch in size at 4 weeks. You can see a little heartbeat, so the circulatory system has started. So around week 4 to 5, that heartbeat starts. One end of the crescent shape is slightly bigger than the other end, so that's where the head is starting to develop, right? And we start to get organs developing. So there's a lot going on in just 4 weeks, all right? The placenta doesn't attach until week 2 to 3. So for the first couple of weeks, the baby isn't getting nutrition from mum, it's getting nutrition from the egg sac. So here we go. By week 5 1/2, this little thing is about the size of a raisin, a big raisin, a bit bigger maybe, right? Still teeny, teeny, tiny. A lot of women don't even know that they're pregnant at this point, right? If it wasn't planned and it wasn't thought out ahead of time, which is a really good idea to do, right? But if it wasn't, then they may not even know that this tiny little thing that can become a human is growing so quickly inside them, all right? So what's fascinating, I think, when you look at this picture, right? So here's the head, and see how big the head and the brain are in comparison to the rest of the body, right? So a lot of energy is put in very early on to developing brain tissue and the nervous system, okay? I suspect that's going to be an eye. Down here you can just about see that the limb buds now have little paddles on the end of them that are going to turn into hands, and down here you can just about see the feet, but there's less development of the feet at this point than there is of the hands. Okay, this is about 6 weeks. So the placenta is in place, so the baby is getting nutrition from mum. The yolk sac's kind of there, but it's not using that as much. You can see the spinal cord now. So this is the embryo is curled forwards away from the picture, right? So here's the back of its head, and here's the spinal cord developing. You can see there's more development of the arms and the hands than there is of the legs and the feet at this point, and we'll come back to that because that's an important point. Okay. Actually, you know what? I'm going to go back and I'm going to tell you this now. So what we have, let's do it this way around. When we are looking at growth and development, there are 2 laws of direction, okay? The first law is that we develop in a cephalocaudal direction. So anything that has ceph involved means head, right? Brain. So if I have encephalitis, I've got inflammation of the brain, right? Caudal is bottom, feet. So what we always see in development when we're growing, right, is that we grow downwards from our head towards our feet, okay? That's why there's so much more development here in the brain and the head than there is going on in the feet here, okay? The second law of direction is that we grow from the midline outwards, okay? So when you look at this picture, you can see that there's much more development going on along the midline of the embryo than there is out here, okay? So that's proximal distal, and you can see that there's more development of the arms and the hands than there is of the legs and the feet. That's my cephalocaudal. Does that make sense? Remember, guys, that I can't see you, so if you're sitting there nodding your head, I don't know that you're understanding what's happening.
Here.
You're good?
Yes.
Okay. So, this picture is 8 weeks. So this baby is just transitioning from being an embryo into the next phase. Okay? What's interesting about this is if you look very carefully at this, you can see little kind of dark areas in the middle of where the shin would be. So at this stage, at 8 weeks, the baby has no bones to speak of, right? It has cartilage, but it doesn't have bone, okay? So these dark areas are called the primary ossification centers, and that's the area where the genes are going to drive laying down bone cells from that little dark patch, right? So the tibia and the fibula are going to start getting laid down within the leg, okay? You can see that there's we've got a few things that look a bit like toes. We don't have 5 yet on this foot. And again, they don't have bones per se, just some cartilage. All right? Now, we would expect if we had the picture of the whole baby that the ossification was further advanced in the arms and the hands than it is in the legs, right? Because of this cephalocaudal development direction. So as I said, it's transitioning out of that embryo stage into what we call the fetal stage. Fetal stage lasts from 8 weeks until the baby is born. Okay? And during this stage, we get a lot of rapid growth in 2 ways, right? The baby can grow, the fetus can grow either by laying down additional cells, that's called hyperplasia, and it also grows by, once the cells are laid down, we increase the size of them. That's hypertrophy. Okay? And that's important because we don't see this same growth situation once we're born. Right? This is the way the fetus grows, not the way the baby and a person and children and people grow. Okay? So here's my long words: cephalocaudal, proximo-distal. Okay? And the cells have what we call a degree of plasticity, which I always find an odd term because I think of plastic as being something that's hard, right? But when we use the term plastic in physiology, we actually mean that it's very flexible, right? That it can maybe change job. So what we see is that the cells are capable of taking on new functions later on if necessary. Now it depends what system those cells are in, because not all the cells are as plastic. The cells in the nervous system are quite plastic, which is very helpful, right? My godmother just had a massive stroke, and she can't talk at the moment, but I'm really hoping that those speech paths in her brain get rerouted so that she can learn to talk again a little bit, maybe, hopefully. Fingers crossed, right? questions? No questions? Okay. All right. So at 11 weeks, again, the idea of the Kevlar caudal development is very obvious in this picture, right? I've got a very obvious large area for the head and the brain. All right, here's a hand. We've got the placenta. Here's its little butt. And here's the legs and the feet. So probably the variable or the factor that has the most influence on the growth of this fetus is the nourishment that it's receiving from mum. Okay? So it gets all its oxygen via the placenta, which is taking in oxygen and nutrients from mum's bloodstream, right? And any nutrients, all right? So carbohydrates, proteins, fats, they're all coming in via mum's bloodstream through the placenta to the baby. Okay? That means that if the mother has poor maternal health status, right? If she is, for example, low socioeconomic status, and so she doesn't have much money, so maybe she doesn't eat very well, you know, or maybe she's low SES with 3 children, and so she makes sure that the children get more food than she does. Remember, again, at 11 weeks, not everyone knows they're pregnant at 11 weeks. So she may not know yet that she should be eating better, right? So if she's not eating very well, then there becomes a competition for those resources. And unfortunately, what will happen if that competition becomes too great, mum wins out. Right? The body is not going to feed the fetus at the risk of mum's life. So it's the fetus that loses out, and sometimes that means that that fetus doesn't develop and gets spontaneously aborted or something like that. All right? So we want to make sure that mum has a safe and easily readable food supply. Well, not everyone in this country has that. We have what are called food deserts in America. So we have vast areas where, and actually around Portales is considered a food desert, right? People have to travel a long way to get to a shop and get food. We need good prenatal care. Well, what if you don't have insurance? Okay. What if your job, right, if I'm packing bags at Walmart, I'm getting paid not very much, and I'm not getting health insurance. I don't actually know that for sure. I don't know what Walmart's employment policies are. But anyway, you get the picture. Right? And we want to make sure that she has a decreased risk of infection. So we want to think about those ideas that we took, you know, where we want to be taking a little bit of exercise to support the immune system, right? So what we find with women in low SES communities, often that they have babies with lower birth weight, so that means they're not the average size when they're born, and those babies are at increased risk for infection and delayed development. So if that's the community you're going to be teaching in, right, or coaching in, then it's likely that you're going to have children who are not as developed as they should be for their age. Right? Okay, so I'm trying to make the link here as to why we're looking at this information, because I know sometimes it does seem a bit odd to do prenatal stuff. So let's talk a bit more about some of this abnormal, atypical development that we can see. As I said earlier, that can be genetic, or it could be an extrinsic factor. So congenital defects are present at birth. They don't occur after birth. And that can be what we call a dominant disorder. So that means if it's dominant, only one parent has to have the gene that doesn't work correctly. Okay? Or it can be a recessive disorder, in which case you're really unlucky, because that means both parents had the gene that doesn't work correctly. Right? So that's pretty unlucky. As I mentioned, it could be a mutation that occurs at the combining of the egg and the sperm. Okay? And the effects of these genetic issues are variable, right? It really depends which system they impact and how dramatic the level of genetic control is, right? The other way we can see these abnormal developmental pathways is from extrinsic factors we call teratogens, okay? So teratogens are substances that arrive to the fetus via the placenta. As I said, it could be a virus. It could be a drug, right? If mum is a drug user, or she smokes, or she drinks, right? And those factors can lead to producing malformation of certain tissues, all right? So what's interesting when we look at teratogens, sometimes the effects are because I have too much of a certain substance arriving through the placenta. Sometimes the effect occurs because there's not enough of the substance arriving through the placenta. All right? And what we see is that the tissue that is developing most rapidly at the time that that substance reaches the fetus is the one that's going to be the most vulnerable. All right? So I think the next slide. Oh no, okay, a little bit more on these extrinsic. So the placenta can prevent large viruses from getting through, but not all viruses are large. So for example, German measles is quite a small virus, and it can slip across the placenta and end up damaging the baby. There are things like temperature. Okay, so if you are pregnant, the guideline is not to use a hot tub or a sauna, okay, because the increase in mum's body temperature impacts the baby's temperature. You're not supposed to have x-rays. If, you know, so doctors or physicians, or if you're going for a test at a clinic, they ask, is it at all possible you could be pregnant? oxygen deficient atmospheres. That one's interesting because that one is the reason why they tend to say at a certain stage you shouldn't be flying, right? Because in the airplane that they don't have the oxygen saturation at the same level as it is just on the planet, right? The oxygen saturation is a little low. And pollutants, I think, is the obvious one. So, you know, if I live in a city where there's lots of smog from factories, or if we live in a rural area where the farmers and the ranchers spray a lot of pesticides, right? Things like that would be considered pollutants. So this chart is trying to give you the idea of the fact that it depends when the substance crosses the placenta and how much of the substance crosses the placenta. Okay? So remember I said that the placenta didn't connect, wasn't in place until around 2 to 3 weeks. So during those first 2 to 3 weeks, there's no teratogens that can reach the baby because there's no direct connection between the mum's bloodstream and the baby's bloodstream. All right? So during these first 2 weeks, the embryo not surviving is very common. Spontaneous abortion is very common. Again, often the woman doesn't even know she's pregnant. She just thinks she's having a heavier menstrual cycle than normal or something like that, right? Unless it was planned, okay? Once the placenta is in place, we have a different picture because now everything the mum does directly impacts the baby, okay? So the words are a little bit difficult to see, but this top line is looking at the nervous system, okay? And the very dark colorings are periods of time that are highly sensitive in the development of that system, and the paler color is a less sensitive period, okay? So the black dot on the fetus is showing which areas are more at risk at certain times, okay? So we can see here that the nervous system is basically at risk for most of the pregnancy. In particular, the last couple of months, the central nervous system is at risk. The peripheral nervous system is basically fully developed by then, and so it can't be damaged now, all right? If you look at, let's look at here, this line is for the ears, okay? And so during this period of time where it's very dark, that's a period of time you do not want to catch German measles, because babies who are born to mums who had German measles are often born deaf. Okay? Now, that's an example that's easy to use. Okay? If mum catches German measles down here, right, the baby isn't going to be born deaf because the ears haven't started developing yet, right? If mum catches German measles here, the baby won't be born deaf because the ears are complete by then, right? So as I said, the timing of the external factor is crucial as to what it can and can't impact, okay? So if something occurs, then the baby could be small for their age at birth. So that means that, let's say they're born at 8 months instead of 9 months. They're prenatal, but they may be the right size and weight for being 4 weeks early, right? Small for their age at birth means at whatever point they're born, they're smaller than they should be. They don't weigh enough and they're not long enough. Okay? And in particular, because of the nervous system and the central nervous system, which is the spinal cord and the brain, if they are low birth weight, then that often means that their brain is impacted. The size of their brain or the development of their brain has not fully occurred. Okay? Okay, if when you go onto Blackboard, if you go into the lecture notes, underneath the PowerPoint 8A, there's another PowerPoint set up there that is all about teratogens. So if you I'm going to talk just about a couple, but there are lots of teratogenic effects that can occur. It's another reason why I say planned pregnancy is a much better idea if you can pull that off, because there are so many substances that can be toxic to the development of that baby, right? So the more you know about what's going on, the better. So you can look at that other slideshow to see a bigger range of teratogens and the kinds of effects that they have. What are some of the substances, let's say everyday type substances, that we're told not to do once we're pregnant?
Avoid secondhand smoke.
Avoid secondhand smoke, yeah. Good one. What's another kind of regular drug that we take?
Alcohol, no alcohol.
Alcohol, right? So mums are told they shouldn't drink during that 9 months, okay? So alcohol is a biggie because the impact on the baby is very dramatic. Smoke can impact the baby's lung development and things like that. Alcohol, babies that are born to mums who drink alcohol during their pregnancy are often born with what we call fetal alcohol syndrome. And they have mental delays because they're born with small brain size. They have facial deformation, so their eyes are very kind of slitty, and they tend, this fold here is exaggerated. So they have, and their face looks kind of flat, not similar to, but in a you know, if you look at a Down syndrome, maybe their faces are kind of flat, a little bit like that. So they don't look right? You can kind of identify a child in your class who may be fetal alcohol syndrome. Their growth is slow. They often develop ADHD. They have attentional issues. They can't concentrate for very long. So it's really, you know, it's really sad because this is not something this individual had any control over, right? And it's a lifestyle choice by the mom. It's not like she had to drink alcohol. All right? The other thing that you want to bear in mind is if mum uses drugs, it's even worse if it's like meth or coke or anything like that, then that baby, when it's born and the placenta is cut, doesn't have its drug supply anymore. And so that baby has to go through withdrawal in the baby unit before it can go home. Right? That's a pretty awful idea to think about. But it's important to think about it, right? Don't do drugs when you're pregnant. Don't do drugs if you're the guy and you're trying to get pregnant with your partner, right? What about, what's a substance, do you know, you may not know? What's a supplement that women who are pregnant are encouraged to take? Or a substance that they're encouraged to use while they're pregnant? Anybody know? No? Well, that's good. That means none of you have gone there yet. Well done. So, substances. So, for example, they'll encourage mum to eat lots of foods that have calcium, so yogurt, cheese, milk, salmon, right? Lots of green leafy vegetables, so that those babies' bones can get as strong as possible before it's born. Supplement is folic acid. So they'll want you to take prenatal vitamins, because prenatal vitamins include folic acid, whereas a regular multivitamin doesn't have folic acid in it. Okay. So questions on prenatal development. I encourage you to go and have a look at the teratogens PowerPoint, because there are things that you wouldn't think of, like over-the-counter aspirin, or cold medicines, or things like that, that you would think were okay, that really you should not take unless it's prescribed by a doctor, right? So I really recommend that you go and take a quick look at that PowerPoint. So the other part of the chapter is going to look at postnatal development. So on Friday, we will start from postnatal development, and we'll look initially at growth of the systems. All right, and what is typical, what is a normal growth pattern, okay? And again, if we can understand what is normal, then we can sooner recognize an individual who is not typical and provide some support for that individual, all right? We're going to look at the timing of growth spurts and areas that are very stable in growth. We'll look at the differences between girls and boys in their timing of their growth spurts. And I suspect page 66 is the wrong page. I thought I had changed that. It's going to be 166. I think I missed off the 1 by mistake. All right. So we're going to look at this S-shaped growth curve, and and how that relates to different systems. Yeah, it's really interesting stuff to look at, actually. So, questions? We're done early today. No questions? Okie dokie. Well, I will, what day is today? Thursday. So I will see you tomorrow lunchtime. Oh, look on Blackboard. I may not see you tomorrow lunchtime very much because tomorrow's lecture is being given by a colleague and I have it on YouTube. I managed to get it onto YouTube, so I'm going to probably link it that way rather than play the DVD in here, because I'm not quite sure how that will work across Collaborate. So keep an eye on Blackboard and I will do my best to remember to tell you that today. Okay. All right then.